Hey, everybody. We got Mark from Wisconsin, who's going to be speaking with us in a second. We got Mark from Bangladesh. He's actually showing up now. He changed his invite so he doesn't look like there are two of me. And then me, Wayne, and we're about ready to get Mark on here in a second. I have two quick announcements. The first one is that we started last week, and we want to do this every week, profiling you guys, the team, any of you that want to come on and do anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour. So you can be as short as just an interview, or you can do a full-blown presentation about your project, your life, something about yourself that's of interest, obviously. But mostly we want people to profile new projects they're doing, their businesses they're doing. Shoot, some of you could come on after we've done all the review of them. You could describe your project that you've submitted to Mark and to us. And so that could be one thing that some could do. Alyssa, it'd be wonderful, for example, to hear about your business and your website and such. But anyway, what we're doing is, if you just email me or let us know somehow, put it on a comment, put it on the Facebook page that you'd like to volunteer. We're trying to set these up a couple weeks in advance, and we want to do it on Fridays, but we can do it anytime. We don't have to just do it then. But we've got a 3-hour block that our eventual goal is to get to where, we could have 6 people each going for a half an hour, where they're just talking about themselves and the community. So be thinking about that. Second, you're going to get an email about this later tonight, but we have a brand new webinar that wasn't scheduled when we put out the announcements earlier, and it just got scheduled today, and it's on Saturday. And if I remember right, it's at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time, which would be 11:30 Mountain, and you guys got to figure out wherever you're at. And it's called Pleistocene Park, and it's about a guy from Russia, and maybe Mark even knows more of this guy's story. I've just went to his website and watched a couple of videos, but I'll actually stop with that. Mark, if you know any more about it, about this guy or anything that he's doing, you might say.
Yeah, I know quite a bit about it. Actually, been following that whole line of thought for a long time. It actually is similar in its vegetative effects on the land as the Oostvaardersplassen in the Netherlands. But one of the things is during the Pleistocene, and actually through, I guess, 4 ice ages, most of what is now tundra, which is scrubby, brushy, frozen, permafrosted areas, most of that was elephant steppes. It was grasslands, and it's not really known, or hadn't really been known, why. One of the things that they're finding out in northern regions is when you have large herds of grazing animals on the ground, they're grazing through the wintertime, they pack the snow down, and that allows the cold to penetrate deeper, and permafrost actually grows. They also browse away all of the brush, and the only things that can survive are the grasses, and so they're able to convert, they've done it on small scale places. They've been able to convert tundra to grassland in the Arctic, and to actually increase permafrost. So the Pleistocene Park, they're in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign right now to raise funds to fence off a certain area and introduce herds of animals. Unfortunately, no mastodons available, and to see if they can have proof of concept that that's what actually created the elephant steppes, was large herds of grazing animals in the Arctic regions. And to be able to create permafrost would be something pretty cool in an era of global warming. So that's the little bit. You guys just check it out, Pleistocene Park. And if you're ready there, Wayne, I'll just roll right into this, because I got a 3-hour session per usual.
You are go for it.
All righty. All right, everybody. Thank you for being here. This is one of our last weeks here on our Ecology of Restoration Agriculture series. We're going to talk about the carbon balance of trees and ecosystems. Just as a reminder again, since we are talking from the perspective of ecology, we are using ecological and biological sciences, natural resources sciences as our foundation. Within that community, the word regenerative has had very specific meanings, and we dealt with this a few webinar sessions back. The plant and animal community cannot reproduce itself and persist in the environment, including all of its disturbances, then it is not regenerative, and that's all mentioned on that this week. Just to keep that in your mind. So be thinking about, it's somewhat of a buzzword. Everybody's talking about regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture will ask, is that agricultural model able to propagate itself and expand all by itself, including disturbances that might happen to it? Because if it is not, then it does not meet the definition, the ecological definition of regenerative. Now, we've been talking about forested ecosystems, and although they only cover about 21% of the planet, they're approximately 75% of all the terrestrial plant biomass. And because plants are made out of carbon, about 47% carbon, if we start messing with the Earth's tree cover, we have a disproportionate effect on the atmosphere, on hydrological cycles, on weather patterns, and so on. And this is just a picture that somebody sent across Facebook not too long ago. These are composite images of actual woody tree cover in the US of A. You can see that not the whole thing has tree cover on it. There are parts of it over here that used to have more tree cover. There's parts of it that used to have less tree cover. Actually, the central part here used to have less tree cover. Although you may be surrounded by forests, they are not. The majority of the planet is not a forest and or forested. Has a disproportionately large impact on atmospheric composition. It's fascinating, some of the data that's come out from the UN involved with the climate talks in Paris and then in Kenya last summer, that actually the planet has shown a net increase in forest cover. And there are actually places in Africa where some people are complaining about what they call bush encroachment, because woody plants are coming in to grassland and rangelands. So believe it or not, the planet actually is showing increases. It's way down from where it was back in the 1800s. We are showing some small increases in forest cover, and that actually is a great leverage point when it comes to taking carbon out of the atmosphere. When it comes to trees and forests, 1.6 billion people around the world, almost a third of humanity depends on forests for their economic livelihood. Another 350 million people, they say, are and half of them are indigenous, depend entirely on forest biodiversity for subsistence. If you think of, Canada, Alaska, all of Russia, for example, Africa, South America, hunting is a way of life. You may not necessarily own the land, but people still go out and do hunting and gathering, subsistence, lifestyle type stuff. And then, of course, hundreds of millions depend on forest resources for food, construction materials, and energy. And a lot of what people think of when they're thinking about forest-dependent populations, they're thinking of this on the upper left, the tropical rainforest folks that are wandering around out there. Well, it's not just tropical folks living in a subsistence lifestyle that depend on forests for their livelihood. Anybody who's in the logging and or wood products industry, lumber, etc. We've got mushroom farmers over here. We've got grazers over here, all within forested ecosystems. And I did a search for forest farming, and one of the top hits was this photograph down here, which that's myself, my oldest son, my wife, taken probably 5 or 6 years, 6 or 7 years ago, maybe actually. I thought that was fascinating. We actually, my family has been dependent on forests and forested ecosystems, and now I'm trying to shy away from the use of the word forest, because most people think forestry and woods and closed canopy with no grass. I'm talking forested ecosystems, which means anything that has trees on it, including these suburban backyards that I'm looking at right now. And if you don't believe that forests are of critical economic import, just look at that right there, because if we don't have forests, we don't have toilet paper. This is probably the time that I want to mention there's a lot of hubbub and promotion of things like KNAF and hemp for production of fiber for paper, for example. Yes, you may get about 4 times as much fiber per acre out of hemp that you can use for making toilet paper to wipe your butt. However, hemp is an annual plant. Kenaf is an annual plant. You have to destroy a perennial ecosystem in order to grow this annual plant. You have to disturb the soil either through herbicide or tillage. You have to have some sort of weed control because it will not outcompete everything. Some sort of fertility amendments because you have short-circuited the natural fertility cycles by destroying the ecosystem. Hemp is just another annual crop. It has its uses. It's an incredible useful crop. If we were to use that as a replacement for paper, we wouldn't have any more wildlife left because we'd have to cut down even more forests to grow more hemp. I'd rather have I'd rather have deer living in a forest. I'm kind of switching subjects. I'd rather have deer living in a forest that I would have to eat every once in a while, eat a deer, than cut the forest down to grow soybeans so I wouldn't kill animals. Now we don't have any home for the animals because you destroyed the ecosystem, but at least we can, feel good that we didn't kill them directly and eat them. We ate beans instead. Forested ecosystems are home to countless species of animals, all kinds of herbaceous and non-vascular plants. Bird diversity is focused in the tropical forests. Amazing amount of diversity of life on this planet are critically forest dependent. Now the carbon balance of plants is controlled by the quantity of carbon dioxide that's taken out of the atmosphere and it's turned into physical form. It's pretty amazing. You take a gas and you use a little energy to combine it with other gases and you turn it into like a solid material. That's pretty amazing, I think. That whole process is guided and limited, I guess, by light, temperature, and availability of soil, water, and nutrients, and that they influence the productivity of plants and ecosystems. This photograph is up in Alaska. As we remember from earlier webinars, the higher in elevation we go, it's similar to going north in latitude. So it's as we approach this tree line here, it's probably just too doggone cold up there for trees. Probably also there's a limit, limited soil water because it may be frozen all the time, or the soil is basically crushed rock and it hasn't really developed yet. There's not a lot of biological activity going on, and slowly, perhaps these plants are making their way further up the mountain. That's the limits on these, is temperature right there for sure. This just kind of goes to show this process here. These trees, they're like, if you've ever seen corals, fan corals on a reef, just flowing back and forth in the water. Trees, woody plants, all plants actually, are just like that. The atmosphere is a thin ocean, and these plants are just going back and forth, and they're both passively and actively taking gases right out of the atmosphere and solid particles right out of the atmosphere and incorporating it into their bodies, using the energy from the sun as the driver. They assimilate these nutrients from the soil, they incorporate them within themselves, and eventually they'll return that to the soil in the form of dead leaves, roots, branches, stems. That's all collectively called plant litter. That's really important, and we're going to hit that pretty heavy tonight. It's the whole plant litter idea. All you got to do is look around the world, and you see that on this picture up on the left, obviously there's some cold going on there. Down here on the right, obviously there's some dry going on. This is kind of partway in between. It's kind of moistish, kind of dryish. These two here look very moist. So we can see that the process is controlling the productivity of an individual plant. This individual plant right there can only grow so fast. It's the similar issues that are driving the whole entire system. There's access to water is probably the biggest limit, and then heat is another, excessive heat, and this one is another limit. Now, only a small fraction of the light energy reaching the Earth's surface, about 2%, is used by green plants to take atmospheric CO2 and turn it into organic compounds. And so if you think about such a small fraction of energy coming to the Earth, and such a small percentage of the Earth's surface is actually covered with these plants, how critically important it is that we take care of all of our forested resources and actually, perhaps expand. I wouldn't say perhaps, I'll say definitely. Let's expand the forest cover across the lands that we've previously denuded. One of the statistics that was coming out of the UN is that if we put 10% forest cover on our agricultural land, that will take enough CO2 out of the atmosphere to return carbon dioxide levels to pre-industrial levels. 10% forest cover does not mean taking 10% of agricultural land out of production, planting a block of pines, for example. All it would mean is planting a row of edible tree crops, widely spaced, so we can still use our equipment on the ag land. We would not have decreased productivity. We would have increased productivity. We would have carbon sequestration, soil building, and an additional crop for sale. Now, these carbon compounds are used and they're kind of compartmentalized. They can construct new plant tissue. They can maintain their existing tissues. They can store energy in various different structures, roots and bark and leaves. They can provide defense against herbivores in the form of there's toxins or thorns, etc. They can defend against pathogens and also to reproduce. And most of a plant is made out of lignin and cellulose. Lignin and cellulose, of course, is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. All three of those elements come to a plant through the air. Very important, coming through the air. The soil, yes, is important. That is a limiting factor when it comes to nutrients for the plant, but it's all about the air. So woody plants grow with the amount of carbon that they're taking in through photosynthesis process. The amount that they're taking in is greater than the carbon that they use, that they burn, so to speak, during metabolism, in their leaves, branches, stems, and roots, and the material that sloughs off. So what's amazing about trees is the fact that they actually are a positive rate of return. They're like, I think they're the ultimate capitalist organisms, is that they sit there and they just passively accrue interest through the years. When conditions are right, they get larger and larger and larger, up to certain limits. Now, of course, plants that are adapted to a specific set of environmental conditions, temperature, light, water, nutrient availability, are the most likely to be the best competitors at a site. This is part of the magic of the whole restoration agriculture idea, is that we are going to use, we're going to create systems that are mimicked after the natural plant communities that are adapted and evolved to our place. Yes, you can grow bananas at 8,000 feet in Colorado. However, at what expense? And will they survive any kind of disturbance? How about turn the heat off once and see what happens to those bananas? If you have a place up here, like on this little bald spot, that gets hardly any sun, actually no direct sun at this particular spot right there, has a little bit of a restrictive layer, and so it's mushy and wet, permafrost underneath, you'd be wisest to go ahead and select species that could survive there. Blueberry, Labrador tea, lingonberries, that sort of thing. If you live in an area that has super hyper calcium water, like in this case here, the Plitvička lakes in Croatia, pick the species that are adapted to the site. You'll have the best chance of success. Once you've got a system in place that's feeding you and generating a surplus that you can sell, share, give to friends, whatever, now you can start experimenting with your bananas and silly stuff like that. Now, the gross photosynthesis is the total amount of carbon that plants can take in from the atmosphere. Some of that is returned to the atmosphere during a process called dark respiration. Now, if you think about your body right now, every cell in your body is operating. It's using oxygen to run its metabolic processes, to repair itself, to grow. In the case of muscles, it might be growing, or a child that's going through growth. All of the cells in a plant are respiring just like we are, and that process uses oxygen and gives off carbon dioxide. The reason why they call it dark respiration is that during the light, you don't notice that respiration, that they're giving off CO2 because they're taking in of CO2, and the light is greater than how much they're giving off. So the net photosynthesis is the balance between the two, total photosynthesis and then the respiration that goes on in the plant. That's the net photosynthesis. Now, the rates of net photosynthesis are different in all different kinds of plants. And when things are going perfectly well, it's got, it's got a optimum air temperatures, low vapor pressures, ambient atmospheric CO2 there's all the CO2 it possibly wants. That plant is going to be like a, I hate to refer to an engine, but when you got a vehicle, whatever, that's running at a very high speed, just very smooth, perfectly flat highway, everything's running smooth, that's its photosynthetic capacity. It can go however many miles an hour. It can photosynthesize as fast as it can. That's its capacity. And the photosynthetic capacity of plants varies a lot. Even within one plant, there'll be a different photosynthetic capacity. If we look at this tree on the right, these leaves in the sun are going to be photosynthesizing at a different rate than the ones that are in the partial sun, partial shade. They're going to be photosynthesizing at a different rate than the ones in the full shade. And even the leaves on that tree are going to be adapted differently. On the sun-loving or the sun-exposed ones, there'll be large cells with small chloroplasts. The leaves will be smaller and thicker to kind of protect against overheating, too much sun. There'll be a low leaf area ratio and a high root to shoot ratio with a high photosynthetic capacity, whereas in the shade, this on the left refers to both individual plants, but the same applies to these individual leaves. The leaves will be much larger, they'll be softer, they'll have a lot more chloroplasts because they have to use less light in order to photosynthesize. So here's some of the adaptations to sun and shade. Now, the maximum photosynthetic capacity of trees is lower than most agronomic crops, like maize, for example, or wheat. Does this really matter? And you'll hear this over and over again, when people are arguing, oh, tree crops can't feed the world, they have the photosynthetic capacity is just not there. Corn, for example, it's like corn is one of the most efficient crops at turning sunlight into a consumable carbohydrate. I think it's like up in the 90s as far as efficient. However many photons land on it turns into a usable carbohydrate. However, if you look at corn, it only grows for this brief period of time, May to September, and it goes really high, which means it's almost, I'm going to say 50 degrees north is where we're at, so somewhere between 30 and 50. This is the temperate zone right in here. So it's during a few brief weeks in the summertime when that corn plant is full-sized and it starts to fill the cobs and the kernels on the cob, it's going all out as fast as it can. However, there was sunlight available through the rest of the year, and in many places around the world, even here in Wisconsin, probably it's above freezing for many of these months, a lot more months. So although it's very efficient, it's not very effective. Whereas if we use a plant that's less efficient, it won't go up as high, it won't grab as much as that total sunlight. However, it does it over a longer period of time. The green, if you scratch the bark off a young stem on a tree, it's green underneath. Twigs on trees. These trees around me right now that have no leaves on them are photosynthesizing right now. The sun is going through the bark. It's shining on the buds. These trees are photosynthesizing, and it's over here. It's way over here. So for a longer period of time, there's actually more potential productivity with a woody plant than there is with an annual plant. The annual plant may have more total photosynthetic capacity, but over a shorter period of time. Well, now if we're going to develop a system, a woody cropping system with trees as the backbone, and then a whole bunch of other different things thrown in there, including some annual crops, our annual crops might get decreased yields because they're now partially shaded. However, you start adding these yields plus these yields plus these yields plus these yields, and now we're not even talking about the decomposition rate. What if we start now farming the decomposition cycle as well? We have a lot more potential for capturing sunlight and carbon to turn it into the carbohydrates, proteins, and oils that we eat, that we need to survive. A lot more potential in the perennial woody polyculture system. And now the sun-loving trees have some of the highest photosynthetic capacity of all trees. If anybody's seen the fastest growing tree that you ever have, they're mostly the sun-loving trees, and they can really crank. Hybrid poplars are some of the champions in this neck of the woods. A lot of the hybrid willows are. Some of the shade tolerance, however, are a lot lower. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Maybe we want to use more sun-loving trees and not as many shade-tolerant trees. Or maybe what we can do, here's just a couple of charts that shows the different photosynthetic capacities of trees. Here's one of the faster ones in my neck of the woods, the black locust. I don't have red ash around here. I'm not familiar with it. We do have white ash and black ash, green ash, and that's one of the highest ones here. Here's your aspens. Aspens and the poplars, they really go fast right there. Yet some of your other ones like sugar maple and beech, American basswood, these are very useful trees. Maybe we will go ahead and we'll grow our sun-loving trees, have a slightly open canopy, and have shade tolerance underneath it. We now have 2 layers of agriculture going on. We don't need the total photosynthetic capacity for each one. Maybe we can manage our canopy structure. This is just a different graph showing the different response to change in light intensity for different kinds of trees. Oak is somewhat of a mid-tolerant. Probably if we put sugar maple in here, the curve would be like this in the sun and like this in the shade. So what you notice here, what this is showing, is that grown in the shade, it's not photosynthesizing at capacity. Grown in the sun, it is at its capacity. Well, here's oak in the shade. Well, what if we open up the canopy, give it some more light? Now it's going to accelerate it, and it still can't run that fast, but it can run this fast. So the canopy architecture, a canopy that's efficient at intercepting solar radiation, it can outweigh your moderate photosynthetic rates. It can allow some trees to attain large carbon gains despite the relatively low net photosynthetic rates of individual trees. And so what we've got here just shows an example of how we can manipulate canopy architecture. And one of my target canopy architectures is green from top to bottom. It doesn't matter if the trees are 3 feet tall. We just planted them last year. Well, I want green from top to bottom because I can harvest green. I can, if I want to, I can juice it and make tofu out of it. I can graze it with an animal, and I can eat the animals. I can sell the animals. If I've got green from 100 feet up all the way down to the ground, I've got an economic system that I can work with. If I close the canopy and I lose that grassy layer, I've got a forest. I have other options, but not as many options. There are more options for us economically and for producing food, especially if we're going to eat mammals at all. In this semi-open architecture, we can have these plants will be growing at their fastest possible rates with a open structure, full sun. Now, the rates of photosynthesis rarely attain their maximum in natural field conditions because light, soil, nutrients, and water are in short supply. Here's a project I worked on in California. What do you think was in short supply in the past 5 years in Southern California? And why did all these tropical rainforest avocado trees drop dead when the adapted live oaks did not? Fascinating. Water was in short supply. This is the start of a water management system, terracing this whole entire hill, and then going to be planting perennial grasses instead of the annual grasses at a dominating site right there. That's why managing the water is of critical importance. Get your water managed on your site first and foremost, because that is the driver of everything. Air temperature will also control carbon gain in your leaves and plants. By influencing the rates of photosynthesis. Temperatures between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius are the optimum range here for photosynthesis. This is the maximum total net gain you can get. And the net gain, you're going to be producing more, leaves and twigs, more trunk, the bole of the tree, more fruit, more root mass. You have more total opportunity for gain right in these temperature ranges. And I don't know if it was in this webinar series or just another presentation I was giving, showing that what's becoming more and more apparent is that as carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere increase, crop yields are actually declining. And in part, that's because the temperatures, the peak temperatures, are higher than typical. And so the crops will shut down in the middle of the day because it's too hot and they just won't photosynthesize at all. They'll shut down their stomata. They don't want to lose any water. However, they're still respiring. The cells are still metabolizing, and they're still going to be giving off CO2. So eventually, above these temperatures, the plant is giving off more CO2 than it's taking in. Water is absolutely critical for plant growth. Um, there's a gamble, and I know I'm going to talk about this in another slide. If a plant wants to take in carbon dioxide, it's got to open its stomata. On the underside of leaves, there are holes, and I was going to do a demonstration with a balloon to show you how these stomata work that will open up and allow for gas exchange. It allows the atmosphere to come in, and the atmosphere has all kinds of things in it. Of course, CO2 is a big part of it. Nitrogen is a big part of it. And then it also lets off some of its own water vapor when it opens its stomata. So at the same time that water diffuses out, they're losing water while they're taking CO2 in. So yeah, they got a gain by taking in the CO2 that they'll be able to use to manufacture sugars, which is part of their metabolic process, which keeps them going. However, they're losing water, which is critical. And then, of course, the mineral element that's been found to be the most limiting in plant growth, terrestrial plant growth, is nitrogen. If it wasn't so important, it wouldn't be used as fertilizer all over the place, everywhere. Pretty much you can just add some nitrogen to most circumstances, and the plant will actually grow faster. How it works in deciduous trees is that the actual respiration inside the leaf, it speeds up the photosynthesis, whereas in conifers, it's more likely to stimulate extra elongation and production of more needles. And so instead of, if there's a ample amounts of nitrogen, a deciduous tree will just metabolize faster, it'll photosynthesize faster, whereas a evergreen tree will want to grow faster and produce more needles that can use up that extra nitrogen that's in it. So it's a slightly different response to how they deal with nitrogen. And because of their size and their longevity, trees require a lot of carbon to maintain function of their cells. As the tree gets older, there's more and more of the tissues in the tree are not photosynthesizing, but they're still alive, and they go through cellular respiration. And so as these trees grow, they allocate some of their energy reserves to stem elongation, to production of leaves, to roots, root growth, storage of nutrients, reproductive structures, all that kind of stuff. And these are just some charts showing how they're allocating it. So the plant respiration, when new tissue is being grown, it's growth. That's construction respiration. The cells are working overtime using energy that's been produced during the photosynthetic process, and stem elongation is construction. Well, once those stems are elongated and there, well, now they have to kind of like be held steady. They need to be maintained and repaired. And when the cellular respiration is taking place, it's giving off CO2. It's using energy from the photosynthesis process. And eventually what ends up happening is a tree will get to a point where the amount of photosynthesis that it's gaining is not as great as the amount of energy that is needed to maintain it. And so what happens is the tree begins a process of decline. I put this picture here because this picture, it's a 180-degree shot of El Castagno de Centocavalli. It's the largest trunk of any tree ever, and from here to here, it's about 75 feet across the trunk of this tree. It is way past the stage where it's going to be growing any taller or putting on any more wood. It's actually in the process, the slow process of the decline, where it is kind of cannibalizing its own self, in part to just maintain itself. It's got so many, so much tissue that's alive that requires energy from the tree. That's the size of it. You see these people here in the city park. This is one tree right here. So as the tree grows, its crown eventually reaches a maximum size, and it can't get any bigger than that. That's about as big as a chestnut tree crown can get. That's it. It will never get any bigger than that. Then there's larger amounts of material that requires maintenance respiration, and so it comes into a balance. Either it's making no net gain, or it starts to decline. A couple of weeks ago, I know I showed the picture of the redwood sugar pine plant community several different times. That particular plant community may be in the phase of decline. Everybody thinks it's really wonderful and healthy. It may actually be releasing more carbon dioxide than it's taking out of the air. And this all relates to how we manage and maintain our restoration agriculture systems, and we'll get to that. How these plants allocate their resources is very strongly genetically controlled. It can do defense compounds, growth, storage, reproduction, and the ones that we think of, or at least I work with mostly with my woody plants. I want them to put a disproportionately high amount of their photosynthate into producing crops. That's reproduction. I want seeds and fruits, berries, nuts to eat. Well, I also want them to have storage so they can survive the winter. Well, then the defense compounds, I don't know if it's defense compounds that are necessarily what we're looking for, or if it's just some other kinds of natural resistance that we don't exactly know what it is or why they're resistant to pests and diseases. So I want to have more heavily weighted towards seed production, fruit production, and then root storage to survive the winter, because I live in a cold northern environment. And of course, environmental factors also play a role in this. Now, by knowing how a plant allocates its carbon reserves, and the carbon, of course, it can be used different ways. Carbon is the building blocks, and it's also the energy. And so once we understand how a tree allocates seasonally, then we know how we can manipulate our system. So the availability of light, we can manage for the availability of light, we can manage for the availability of water, soil nutrients, and we can time our disturbance so that there will be the appropriate influx of nutrient at the right time for whatever it is that we want to focus on. And if it's the spring of the year or early part of the growth cycle, and we want these trees to elongate really well, let's give them a flush of fertilizer maybe a week or two right before they start to grow gangbusters. Maybe that means we go in and we graze some grass so there's not as much competition for moisture and nutrients. We graze the grass, and we're using cattle perhaps, and now we're giving some manure and urine to the system at the same time. We've reduced competition for nutrient and water, and we've increased the available fertilizer on that particular site. That's a very specifically timed animal disturbance. Well, then if we're going to do, like, I'll take chestnuts because I do chestnuts a lot, in late August into early September, when the trees are really starting to ripen those kernels and fill out the chestnuts. That's when I'll go in and I'll do a heavy graze, once again to reduce the competition and to give it a flush of fertilizer. So then there's extra nutrient moisture available to those trees to ripen that crop faster, have a higher yielding crop. And this is kind of one of the goals. If the demand of our new leaves and shoots and roots is satisfied, then that surplus carbohydrate can be allocated to whatever it is that we want it to within that system. And that's what we want to get to. That we want to get in that sweet spot where we have surplus energy available to allocate however that plant sees fit. Now, even if these trees, woody plants, are growing on really, really, really rich soil, they have all the soil nutrients available to them. If there's low light, there's not a lot of light available to them. If it's a cloudy environment, perpetually cloudy environment, or if it's really shady, there's so many trees together that they're creating shade. What happens is that the tree is going to almost panic kind of, and it allocates its resources to the new leaves and roots, because it's got to get some more nutrients from the root, and it's got to catch more sunlight from the leaves. So it's putting all of its resources into top leaves and roots. And then what happens is it doesn't have enough energy left over to actually build stem diameter, and it doesn't have enough energy left over to reproduce, doesn't have enough energy to produce defense chemicals, and as a consequence, they don't grow as fast. The stem doesn't grow as fast, and that they now become susceptible to pests and diseases. And look what happens. They start to fall over and get infected with pests and diseases. That's exactly what happens in the stem exclusion phase. The ones that have managed to get a piece of canopy and got a good purchase of soil and nutrients, they will outcompete, but it's not necessarily outcompete. It's just that the ones that lost and fell over, they just didn't get enough of what they needed, sunshine and nutrient. This is exactly the situation that's happened right here. This is on New Forest Farm. I think I've showed some of these when I was actually doing the work last fall. Now, all of this was grass over here 20 years ago. The larger trees on the right were about this size when we moved to the farm 20 years ago. So what we did is I planted some trees in there and then walked away. And we've grazed cattle in there sometimes. We've grazed pigs in there sometimes. And these trees have started to reproduce. They drop seeds in addition to the trees that I planted. They grew. They've now gotten to the point where there is stem exclusion going on. Some are starting to grow slower. Some are starting to reach for the sun in weird, crazy directions. I want to insert myself into this stem exclusion phase because it's going to happen anyway. So I am going to exclude some stems. What I'm going to do is I'm going to exclude the ones that aren't necessarily going to produce me some sort of crop in the future. And on my farm, I focus on mast trees. I want to have trees that produce nuts, and then I also want fruit trees. So I'm going to go through here, and I'm going to favor oak and hickory, walnut. There's a couple apples in here as well, cherries. I'll favor those because they produce food for me and my livestock. So go through the chainsaw. That's my old one tank of gas type chainsaw technique. And what you see on the ground, you see all these branches. Well, what happened to the stems, the other trunks of wood? That goes into the front end loader, and the appropriate ones at the appropriate season. When I cut these in the fall, that's not the time of year to inoculate with shiitakes or whatever. Well, we got some hickories here, and I believe that's a piece of an oak, about 13 years worth of growth, 5 inches or 6 inches in diameter or so. So I'm getting the yield out of the system and setting it up for future yields, because once I open this up, there's going to be more light available, there's going to be nutrient available, and the grass will start to flourish in there, and of course the decomposition rate. So I go in with my tractor, I use my flail chopper, chip up most of that brush, and just remember I did the numbers a couple weeks ago. It's somewhat like funny money, but it's not. It's a very serious proposition here. It really does work that we can produce approximately 300 pounds of beef per acre. And if you do it at use value organic over the 20 years that I've been here, that's 40 grand worth of beef I've been producing for my own personal use. Lumber, the real estate increases in value, because if we want to, we can sell this as a recreational property because it's a spectacularly beautiful property. Oyster mushrooms, and then 3/4 firewood, approximately come out of that acre every once in a while. And then next year, this system will actually produce Stropharia and lion's mane mushrooms. Now, the individual trees, they have an important influence on the carbon balance of forest ecosystems. But what also has an important influence are all the other things besides trees. The plants that are in association with them, and of course the animals have a lot to do with it. These are just agroforestry pictures. This one was over in Europe. They're doing a lot with poplar in Europe. We have to understand their metabolism as well, because they're not photosynthesizing. they're consumers. The producers are the photosynthesizing. You know, in the ecological terms, a producer is something that is photosynthesizing or chemical synthesizing from deep sea vents and stuff like that. Whereas the other organisms are consumers. A grazer like a cow is a primary consumer because it's grazing on grass directly, and poultry, although they do primary consumption, they'll eat green, they're also eating seeds and bugs and whatnot. They're a secondary consumer. Now, the gross primary production is the amount of carbon fixed into an ecosystem by all the plants during that process of photosynthesis. And then the difference between a gross production and then its losses due to respiration is called its net primary production. The NPP is used quite a bit in characterizing different ecosystems. So just to understand, if I slip by accident and I say the word NPP, that means total photosynthesis minus its respiration. It's the equivalent of if you eat, you know, X many calories worth of food and say 10,000 calories worth of food, but you only burn 2,000 calories because you're a jogger or whatever, your NPP is 8,000 calories, the difference between what you actually consumed and what you used during respiration. And then the growth metabolism of all these decomposer organisms in the soil, and that of the animals foraging on these ecosystems, is all fueled by the organic matter produced through the photosynthesis, and all of that non-living plant stuff is not part of the net photosynthetic productivity, but it's the live biomass accumulation. All these plants right here, the tropical rainforests, are the winners planet-wide as far as total amount of living biomass that's there. Living biomass doesn't necessarily mean it's very productive. It could be stagnant, and actually it could be a tremendous amount of living biomass, and this forest right here actually could be giving off CO2, depends on its stage, and we'll have to really pay attention to that in our systems. But what's the magic for us is the decomposition rate. These are coral mushrooms. Look at all the litter, the sticks and the leaves that are deposited on the soil. This is a hybrid poplar stump. The poplar tree was planted way back a long time ago. It grew, we harvested it, we turned it into boards. And the smaller diameter logs are in a mushroom yard. I also inoculated the stump. Now there's mushrooms on the stump. It's the decomposition of organic matter in the soil with the availability of minerals from the mineral strata, the parent material. That is where the fertilizer comes from. That is where all the magic happens. Your fungi and whole soil food web, it's all driven, it's all fed by, it's all energized on the leftovers. It's part of what is the surplus in the forested ecosystem. So right here, this is a perfect example of these animals in here, the secondary production in the system. They're part of the nutrient cycling. They're critical to the healthy photosynthesizing of this whole entire system. And what I want to do here, I hope this will work. I'm going to have to pull my headphones, and Mark, I'll rely on you to tell me if the audio can't be heard. Really quiet, and let's see if you guys can hear this. And there's no sound yet, except birds. I'm standing now in another stand of chestnut, a coppice agroforestry system. This particular stand of chestnut is about 15 years old. I remember because it was 2001 when the World Trade Center towers came down. But anyways, this started as an alley cropping system where we planted chestnut and grew produce in between. This actually started with small grains. This has had buckwheat, barley, rye, various different seasons, wheat, Then once this had zucchini, once it had onions, it had carnival squash, and then as the trees got larger, grass in the alleys, and then grazing. The previous one of the previous videos that we showed a younger stand of chestnut that we came in for the first time and removed all of the undesirable species, dropped the branches, and then chipped them. Well, this particular stand is at phase 2 and phase 3. It's already had the undesirable species removed for the most part, mowed and chipped. It's been grazed in the meantime. Well, with chestnuts, a very good substrate for shiitake mushrooms. And so late this winter, we harvested, probably 50% of the chestnuts over here on the south side of this patch. And notice how there's a lot more light now coming in to the ground so that the grass can actually grow vigorously. We chose the trees in August or September when they were loaded with nuts. We marked the ones that had the most nuts, the largest nuts, etc., and then removed the ones that didn't. We left ones that were susceptible to chestnut blight if they had nuts. We left them behind because we want to have enough of the blight around to continually apply selection pressure on the remaining chestnuts, and that if they're susceptible to chestnut blight, they'll get it eventually, and then their tops will die back. So what happened on the south side here is we removed a lot of the material, inoculated it with shiitake mushrooms. Some of the stumps have been inoculated with shiitake mushrooms. Well, then the branches and the tops were laid across the path in the alley. 3 days ago, the cattle came through, and you can see here I was just standing on top of a cow pie that's been run over with a flail chopper. And you can see all of the chips. We've chipped all of the branches up in the alley. We let in more light. We chipped the branches. We get some good grass grazing going on. Now I get a little bit of shot of fertilizer in here. Once we do another thinning on the north side here, areas where the grass has died out from excessive shade and water competition, more light will get in there, more water will get in there, and then the grass will grow. One of our goals here is to maintain this as grazing constantly, because the animals are actually helping us to manage the ground layer, and they're also managing our fertility cycle, obviously. And then later on in the season, after we've harvested all the chestnuts that we want, ends up being mid to late October, we move the fence around here, and the pigs will clean up and get all the chestnuts that we missed. So once again, this is another age class within a coppice chestnut stand, about 14, 15-year-old trees.
All right, so I hope you guys were able to hear that. So part of what you noticed is we were manipulating the canopy structure, which allowed us to manipulate the light levels, which also allowed us to harvest yields in the form of firewood and mushroom logs. It also allowed us to get better grass growth, which improves the grazing. And one simple pass, so that was phase 2. There's only two passes through there to maintain that chestnut grove in the past 20 years. Very low input system, simply because we're doing our best to imitate the natural processes that might occur naturally in that. And to know when to do that, timing is important. Here's another thing that we do at that phase, Winecap Stropharia. If you look at this, you go through there and you chip it. This is the sawdust spawn. It's little chunks of sawdust that have been inoculated with Stropharia mushroom. And just grab handfuls of it. You toss it all around. You run the flail chopper over, chip everything up, grinds it up pretty fine. Because remember, the nutrients that are now part of the system, part of the soil food web, the nutrients are released by the decomposition process. The organic matter is the energy that drives the whole soil food web. So some of the soil food web I want to also be able to eat. I might as well it's like putting yeast in flour to make a bread dough. I want to put the mushroom spawn down here to get that decomposition rate going really fast. Within a few months, you got edible mushrooms all over the place. Once you have Stropharia naturalized on your property, they'll be showing up all over the place. Of course, they're weather related. You know, they'll need adequate moisture. So in the more arid environments, they'll only appear maybe a couple times a year when you're getting your moisture in there. So from the animals that we're harvesting, other crops in alleys, for example, mushrooms, for example, they're all net secondary production. They are other than the trees obtaining energy from photosynthesis. It's all this right here. This right here is all that. This is the trees. their gross photosynthesis minus the respiration. Their net photosynthesis is left over. They got some construction, maintenance, and repair going on. That's their net primary productivity. Well, now, out of that net primary productivity, some can get consumed by animals and excreted, which becomes nutrients, gets assimilated back into the system. There's mortality, there's predation, and then there's live biomass of the consumers. So your animal herds have a certain weight and a certain numbers, etc. All of this is the secondary productivity. This is where often our cash flow has been coming from in a wooded system or forested system. Eventually, we'll be getting stuff from the primary production as well, the tree crop. So any disturbance that reduces or eliminates the live biomass on a site, it increases the rates of soil organic matter decomposition. It will lead to a loss of carbon from an ecosystem. And under such a system, your total productivity, your net ecosystem productivity is negative, and total ecosystem biomass declines. This is really critical. This has been observed over and over and over and over again, and proven scientifically over and over again with statistical verification that'll drive you nuts. What this is saying that if you go in and you reduce or eliminate the biomass, you will oxidize all that soil organic matter. You will have a net loss of carbon from the ecosystem. You will be able to support fewer and fewer organisms on that site. And what are the implications of that? That's exactly what annual agriculture does, is it eliminates the ecosystem and puts it into this annual phase where it's got to have this disturbed soil, and you're only beginning to recover. You recover with the annual plant, but instead of moving into your perennials through succession, you go back and you disturb it again and again and again. The ability of this system to support a total amount of biomass is less than if it was a three-dimensional a wooded forested system with annuals in between. This will support fewer life forms than a three-dimensional perennial system. Carbon is the energy fueling the whole thing. It's all about catching that carbon, but it's not just catching the carbon and storing it in the long trunk of a tree for a redwood, for example. It's all about cycling that carbon in the system, using that surplus energy as a fuel that now releases the minerals in the soil. So now you've got this constant fertility thing going on. Ernst Getsch is really the only other guy that I've heard talking about how critical it is for nutrient cycling when you get to the stage when you start doing chop and drop with branches and leaves. Once you get to that phase and you start accelerating this process right here, now you're talking a real healthy, vibrant, fast-growing system, a high-yielding system with very few external imports. The more carbon on that site, the more life that system can support. How can we measure net ecosystem production in a restoration agriculture system? Those of you who are interested in doing research, or at least keep some records on your own place just to make sure that we're going in the right direction. Diameter breast height of any kind of woody stems, the basal area, which is the sum total of the area of woody stems across an acre of ground or hectare of ground. You can measure plant heights, canopy diameters through the years. You can measure animal weight gains, your crop yields, your volume of wood harvested. These are all ways that we can measure and observe the fact that we are moving in a positive direction, or to all of a sudden take feedback and say, hey, wait a minute, I'm not getting the gains that I was before. How can I manage my system slightly different to improve gains? Or you can do what Kevin Wolz and the woody perennial polyculture folks have done down in Urbana, Illinois. They have all kinds of meters and monitors out in the fields measuring all kinds of gases and light levels and so on. I really think that kind of research is critical. However, I'm not going to fund it on my own particular property because I don't have the $30,000 for some of the equipment. But I'm more than happy to support any researchers that want to do any kind of machine measuring of things on a property. And once again, there's predictable differences in above ground net primary productivity over the whole Earth's surfaces. Geographic differences aren't random. They're linked to the climate patterns, soil types, rainfall patterns, temperature, etc. We know basically how your part of the world is going to look, or is supposed to look, or should look, or can look, and it's your job now to go into your part of the world and help to optimize that system and keep it in a very fast growing phase, very productive phase. This is back to the fundamental trade in photosynthesis. In order to get carbon dioxide into the plant, it's got to release some water. That's transpiration. And evaporation from surfaces, from the Earth's surface, from plant surfaces, plus the transpiration through gaseous exchange with the leaves. That's evapotranspiration. Since water is so critical for productivity in our systems, managing our water is topmost. This is a job we're doing in the southeastern United States. Alley cropping, managing the water. You can see how we've gone. This is about 7-8 years after clear cut on this site. We mowed alleys and leave rows of trees behind, put a pond so we can catch water, store it here, and spread it all out across the hillside. Once again, alley cropping, and over time, see, this is at the stem exclusion phase. We'll continue to enhance that stem exclusion by removing the ones that aren't growing as favorably as we would like. Soil parent material has an effect on ecosystem production. Coarse grain soil just can't hold as much water as fine grain soil like the clays can. In both cases, both here and here, it's all about increasing that soil carbon. The quickest way to get fast soil carbon is get some grass on it. You scatter grass seed out here, not all of it's going to survive. Some will, and that starts the beneficial process of being able to hold a little bit more water. Now you start to have a little soil food web going on. You're now starting to chelate those soil minerals, turn them into a bioavailable form. You're beginning the process of creating soil here out of the bare rock. Whereas in this case, we turn red clay into a nice black clay-derived soil in 20 years. So nitrogen availability in these woody systems is controlled by the activity of the soil microorganisms. I don't know if I can emphasize that enough. They get their energy and essential nutrients from decomposition of the plant litter. When decomposition takes place, only a portion of the nitrogen is used by the microbes that are doing it. The rest is now released to the roots of plants. Decomposition of the organic matter is critical for release of fertilizer to our trees. The decay cycle is an essential driver of our systems. Have I said that enough? Farm your decay cycle. We can manage the timing of litter deposition. We can cut when we want to cut. And it's mean residence time. How long does it stay there before we either chip it up or somehow incorporate it? By strategically accelerating or decelerating the decomposition rate of the ground litter, we get free fertilizer at the appropriate life stage of the woody crop. Manage your growth cycle. You got to manage your decay cycle. Timing is everything. Water is critical. The temperatures are important. Organic materials available. And look at that. We can even sell this stuff and make a couple of bucks by creating fertilizer for our plants. Now, following a disturbance, living biomass, it increases from near zero to that of a mature system. This is an old growth beech maple forest in Canada. You may be going into a clear cut. You may be going into agricultural land or some stage after that. We're starting at close to zero biomass, and we're going to increase it. It's going to take years to do that, up to 750 years in that case. The net canopy photosynthesis and the amount of photosynthate is a product of a total canopy leaf area. So we want to have full sun on our plants so that plant can photosynthesize as fast as it possibly can. And just before canopy closure sets in, that's when we get to the maximum. It's like the maximum amount of fuel. We've got the accelerator full to the boards on that particular system. Here's a good, all three of these have a good canopy structure. We've got full sun throughout most of the system. A little bit of shade happening back in there and there. We can go manage that with the chainsaw. The deeper and more convoluted the canopy, the greater the photosynthetic surface area, the greater potential photosynthesis we have, the higher productivity potential we have. Where's the photosynthesis going on here? If we're farmers, we need to have photosynthesis. We're not getting as much here, just a little bit of green up top and a couple of shade-tolerant maples in the understory. This is missing. If we only have 2% of the surface or 2% of the sunlight is being captured by plants, they're not even capturing as much of that 2% that they possibly could. Open it up a little, get some more green. Now here's the growth of, sometimes 50% of the tree growth is below ground, and it's much of that's in fine roots. Now those fine roots, they grow and they die back. They grow and they die back. They'll grow and they'll suck up the decomposition products, and then they'll die back and they produce their own decomposition products. So it's almost like they're cannibalizing themselves. This is just a chart showing that in places that have, you know, a higher mineralization and a higher decomposition rates, there's more total total productivity. And then of course what bothers me about this is the conclusion they come up with this is, oh look, nitrogen availability imposes a constraint on ecosystems. They're using this observable phenomena to come up with a conclusion. All they have to do is add nitrogen fertilizer, things will grow faster. It's ridiculous. This is showing us that, yeah, we get higher productivity with a higher decomposition rate, mineralization of the soil. I say what we have to do is crank up our decomposition rate and crank up the mineralization in the soil. This is where the action is, right there. These fine roots, the decomposition of the organic matter interacting with the bare mineral soil. The minerals of the solid earth are becoming plant. The atmosphere is becoming plant, which is decaying. This is the energy, that's the engine that makes our whole system run right there. Controls the amount and timing of nutrients released. Now this is really critical, and actually we're way over time here. I would like to spend a little bit more time on this next week, because this slide here and this slide here are almost like a Rosetta Stone, going to tell us how to manage our systems through time. So I'm going to end right here, maybe take a couple of questions, not too many, and then we'll start next week with this particular slide right here. Anybody home? Oh, great. I've been talking to outer space. Do we have Mark or Wayne? Well, okay, if we don't have Mark or Wayne, I don't have the ability to look at the questions, and so I'm not going to. I guess I will call it an evening. We'll see you next week. We'll start with this slide. This slide tells us how, when, and where to interact with our site, and I really hope that you guys have been hearing me. Somebody can't even see the comments. I don't even know if you guys are there. So have a good night, everybody. We'll see you next week.